Welcome, welcome. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining. So this is our third Elevating Women in Leadership taster session. So thank you for joining us as we explore some of the topics in our Women in Leadership series. And we've got one more left next week if you have been joining all four of them. So my name is Colette Andrew Arthur. I'm an Elevating Women in Leadership consultant at LHH. And I manage the programme Design and Delivery. Joining me today, you'll have seen, perhaps as you joined, Gail Lynham. She's also part of our Elevating Women in Leadership facilitator team and is an executive coach for us. So you'll hear from Gail throughout the session, and I'll hand over to her just shortly. Before we do that, let me just recap on the taster sessions in this series so far. So if you joined us for the first one, we had career activism at the end of June. And then last week was our strengthening confidence and resilience session. Today, of course, we're going to be looking at presence, impact and brand. And then, as I say, our last one in the series is next week, and we're going to be looking at adding strategic value. So hopefully you'll be joining us for that one as well. So we're going to take you through how we deliver our Elevating Women in Leadership programme and give you as much overview of the topics that we cover in these modules as possible, as well as development for yourselves as you join. So if you are joining with a view to focusing on yourself and your own development, as I say, what we have accompanying today is the worksheet. And so the worksheet is your takeaway, and we encourage you to use that to think about the topics that we have raised, the questions that we're going to pose to you, and you can take that away and obviously continue your thinking around these areas. In terms of individual support, for those joining for your own development, we really do recommend that you find a buddy to talk to around what comes up for you in these sessions. And we do this on our programme as well. So we encourage buddying through our programmes in order for you to be able to get that individual support, but also to hold each other to account for the actions that you might be committing to as you go through the programme. So we've offered those of you that have joined this programme early on in the series us to match you with your buddy. So if you have requested that of us, hopefully you've received your match and you've made that connection and you're using that relationship to continue your thinking around these themes. If this is your first session today and you wish us to join, wish us to pair you with a buddy, then of course we can do that. So Gail, if you can just pop back one slide, I'm going to just go back to the email address. If you can email us on ewill@lhh.com, we can match you with a buddy, and hopefully that will help provide some additional support. In terms of today's format, we are in a webinar format, and of course that is different to our usual platform for how we deliver these programs, but we've had such a significant interest and uptake in attending these webinars that of course we're limited in what we can do. So we're not going to be able to use the breakout groups as we typically would, and we're not going to be able to use the whiteboarding as we normally would, but we are going to make full use of polls and the chat as you've already seen in our welcome. So we'll encourage you to use the chat as we go through. All right, Gail, if you can move on to the next slide, thank you. So in terms of where we are as we go through the programme, this presence and impact sits quite the way through the programme. So we're heading towards the end, and you'll find us here. So if you can pop the arrow up, Gail, as to where we are. So as you say, we've done the career activism, you've had a discovery session if you are a participant on a programme. Following that, you'd have gone through some pre-work in advance of the strengthening confidence and resilience workshop, and done a discovery session after that. And we talked last week about the discovery sessions and the importance of those for bringing back the group into smaller cohorts in order to share learning and peer coach around any challenges that they are coming up against. So we would have done a discovery session before arriving into what is now the presence and impact workshop that we're going to be focusing on today. Just to get us using the chat before we dive into presence and impact, I know it's only been a week since we looked at strengthening confidence and resilience. But if any of you have got any successes to share in the chat around things you've taken away from your learnings around that module, then do pop them in the chat to share with us. Maybe there were some insights that came up for you. Maybe you've had some conversations with your buddy. Perhaps you've done some reframing around some self-talk. So do share in the chat if you've got anything to contribute there. And so I'm going to move on, as you're thinking to do that, to Gail.
All right. Thank you so much, Colette. I can see Colette Hawkins has raised her hand, Colette. So I don't know if you want to respond to her. If you notice that, that'd be great. Thank you. All right. So here we are at this particular workshop, Leading with Presence and Impact. And I have to say, this is one of my favourite workshops. In fact, I love this workshop because by the stage in the programme that we're at, this workshop really helps the women who are on the programme really dig deep and focus on themselves and really think about their confidence and their delivery and their messaging to do with their brand. And so we invite everyone to share that on the programme, and it's such a privilege to witness and to hear what people share about themselves in terms of their brand. So yeah, I love it. So we start off the workshop really thinking about authenticity and exploring how to bring your best self into any leadership role that you have, how you build your brand, and particularly about increasing your visibility and how you promote yourself within your business. I don't know if you remember that we shared some research at the beginning, and we talked really about how the women who are successful in accelerating their careers often are very good advocates for themselves. They often find ways to share their accomplishments, their achievements, and make themselves more visible in their network. And so what we're encouraging people at the end of this particular session, that we want to have invited everyone, including yourself today at a very high level, to be thinking about how do you communicate about yourself? How do you do this in a way that feels right for you, and how to increase the visibility of your achievements? So we'd start, as always, by welcoming people back into the virtual room, the squircle as we sometimes call it, or maybe face-to-face, because some clients prefer that. And we take a little bit of time to maybe reconnect with learning and focusing on ourselves. So often, busy days, we arrive at the session, half our mind is still outside on what we were doing. So this is an opportunity, which I'm inviting you now, to pause and to breathe and to be present with yourself, and to take this next 60 minutes just for you in terms of your own development. And maybe give yourself a little bit of a shrug of the shoulders to relax yourself. And so let's start then with authenticity. And so I'm going to invite people in the chat function, if you could pop in, what do you think authenticity is? And Colette's going to be keeping an eye on the chat while I am sharing. So we've got a quote here from Brené Brown. I'm sure loads of you will have heard from Brené Brown. She's got, I think, the top most viewed TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. If you haven't done anything with her, please do witness her work, go and learn from her. She talks about authenticity being the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. And I think at LHH, we talk about authenticity being alignment between our internal values and beliefs, the things that are important to us, and alignment with our external behaviour. So it comes from finding your style, your way of leading, and making decisions that are all geared on those values and those beliefs and what's important. And sometimes you'll hear authenticity being touted as, oh, it's just about being yourself. But we would say, maybe not. It's good to remember this is about being your best self with intention. That's the bit that we would add into it. It's really important to be purposeful about who you are in the workplace. And so Brené Brown, just to remind you, go and watch what she does. She shares a lot around being open, a sense of belonging and empathy and love and being vulnerable, and how to see that as a strength and how to bring that into day-to-day life as well as at work. So if we think about being yourself with intention, I love this slide because purple's my favourite colour. I have a purple top on today as well. And what we really think about here as a way of explaining it is to think about, well, when was the last time you went out, just decided to buy paint? Say you're painting your room purple. And you go out and you get to the paint store, and my goodness, there's so many different shades of purple. And what we'd like you to consider is that whatever colour you choose for yourself, that say purple in this instance is your most authentic self, it's your core values. You are consistently purple, but depending on the situation and the context, you might be a different shade of that purple. So I would very much hope that if you met me, no matter where you meet me, I will be Gail, I will be purple, but I might dial it up, I might dial it down, depending on the situation, the context, and that's about the sensing what's in the room and what's required. So they're all you, and you are consistently one colour. So I wonder what colour you are, and what would you choose? So I want to move in.
Purple's their favourite colour too. So you're not on your own.
Not on my own, not on my own. Lovely, thank you, Colette. So we're going to start a poll. So Anastasia, if you could launch the poll, because we're going to move into starting to think about what might be some of the things that get in the way of authenticity at work. We sometimes call these headwinds. So they could be things that hold us back. So do you think there are any headwinds for women? And so if you could answer the poll, do you think yes, often, yes, sometimes, no, unsure? Let's see, what people, yeah. So I can see the yes, whether it's often or sometimes, is getting the biggest vote at this moment in time. And this correlates with what when we're with women on a day-to-day basis, this is what we hear from them all the time, that there are headwinds. And so it's interesting for us to start to think, well, what creates some of these headwinds? And often I think leadership transition can be challenging for us as women because we've got to establish our credibility in cultures that often equate leadership with behaviours that are more masculine norms, and where often positive role models for women are few and far between. And often women tend to lead in slightly different way as well. So maybe a bit of more compassionate and collaborative, as opposed to boldly asserting themselves. And often that cannot be recognised as well. And we hear a lot from women in the workplace that they often feel pressure to fulfill a role, to adopt a persona to gain respect, and that sometimes there is a bias towards this around taking charge. Yes, Colette.
Yeah, just to say, Anna, in the chat, thank you for adding that. You've popped in there that men leaders expect women leaders to think and act like them, and the pressure of a male-dominated industry can add to that. So yeah, I think that's a really nice call out of some of the headwinds that some do face, and that we do hear on our programs. Yeah, Heather can be seen as having a big mouth than being challenging. Yeah, so there are these kind of expectations and headwinds that we do see and hear that women come up against.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, you know, that is not going to change overnight. And this programme is not about fixing women, because we're brilliant as we are. This is more about how we assert ourselves in a way that feels best for us, and to then also work with other women and to educate men as well as part of the process of doing sort of gentle shifts and nudges when it comes to being seen and being heard. And interestingly, we do often hear that in reverse, women who do have an authentic style that is assertive and directive, they can often feel judged by men and women about their leadership style. So there's no easy answers to this, but an awareness is the first step. And we would often call upon good role models, maybe like Jacinta Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, who really from the start of stepping into that role, particularly through the pandemic, she has really led with compassion. And maybe that is giving greater insight and recognition to that as a leadership skill. And McKinsey's latest report on women in the workplace did show that women through the pandemic have risen to the moment by really focusing more on their teams, helping them navigate challenges and supporting individual well-being. And that this is being recognised within the workplace, but not as much as we would want it to be. So I think the more we value a diversity of leadership behaviours and role model that as women we can be leaders and we can do this in a different way, I think we'll start to just sort of nudge these headwinds in a slightly different direction. So this is a good opportunity now then for you perhaps to reflect on, you know, what's the best version of you at work? What do you want to keep? What might you want to let go of that might not be representing your true self? Remembering that there's no one way to lead, and it's all about the best version of you with intention. So what do you need to stop, start, and continue doing to be your best authentic self? And if you have a look at the worksheet that's been shared, there's some questions around that today as well. All right, so let me shift on to our next slide. So I think I may have just jumped a little slide. So let me just, wonderful. So we're really talking here about developing awareness. So the couple of slides previous there were about self-talk, and that's something that's already been covered. But I suppose what we're thinking about here is how do you raise your awareness around your brand and how you are seen. So I've got three little bubbles here. The first one is how do you see yourself? So in this part of the programme, you would have completed a StrengthsScope questionnaire. You would be getting an insight into your key strengths and how they play out at work. And then how others see you is also really important, because that could potentially be a bit of a blind spot, particularly around brand. So you might be invited to do a 360 on the StrengthsScope, where you get a variety of opinion on your strengths. And you may have been invited to do a 5-word activity. And this is a great exercise that you could be doing now, to be going out there and asking people, what would be the 5 words that would best describe me? And it's interesting then to take all of these words and see what is consistent or not consistent around that, because then that feeds into our idea of, well, how do I want to be seen? What might be my personal brand? And do I want to be in charge of that messaging and or, you know, shaping that messaging? Or am I just going to let it happen without me having an input to it? So it's really important here, I think, to be thinking about getting some feedback and tying that in with what you think yourself and using it all to inform you around your personal brand and potentially what people might be saying about you when you're not in the room. So that's what the 5-word exercise can help to do. And Colette, I was going to invite you in now.
Yeah, of course. So as we're looking at personal brand, it's really important to start to think about, once we've discovered how we communicate, what we want to communicate about ourselves, how then we do communicate to others and what they see in that. So we talk about personal brand as being what people say about us when we're not in the room, and actually that's a really sort of poignant point to kind of pause and reflect on. And in the workshop we would spend some more time really getting people to kind of acknowledge this point and before we kind of move on. But with time being against us in these tasters, we are going to nudge on now to Lovely. Really think about what would happen next. So in the workshop, you'd have had a break at that point. So they'd have been, surfacing all of these ideas around their personal brand. And then that would have taken us to the first morning break, after which we would then do a bit of an energizer to keep people kind of in the space of learning with lots of energy. And then we will come back to this piece around personal brand. So we've got some key figures on the slide here that we start to talk to, in acknowledging that there are brands really very well managed or not, but still have a personal brand.
Yeah, lovely.
Gail's already called out Jacinta Arden, that you can see there as a great role model for female leadership with compassion and empathy. Yeah. And of course, then we reference some of the other notable.
And I was just going to say, Colette, so we've got Serena in there. She was yet again at Wimbledon, 40 years old, still, thinking I'm out there, I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to manage my brand. And Greta often gets a little bit of people are a bit unsure, but she sees her Asperger's as a superpower, and she is a bit of a disruptor. And I was thinking about Michelle Obama, in that I feel if I met Michelle Obama, I think it would feel like I was just meeting Michelle. It wouldn't be covered. I think there's something about her transparency and her openness that I think really communicates who she is as a real person. And then we've got poor Megan, who I'm not quite sure at the moment what's going on with her brand. But I think the key thing that Colette and I are speaking to here is this idea of what are you communicating about yourself? What's the impression you're making on others? And are you controlling the narrative on that, or are you just letting it happen? So personal brands just aren't for the people who are famous. They are also for us as individuals on a day-to-day basis. And so what are the sort of ingredients of a brand? And none of these will be a surprise to you at all, actually. So trust is a key one. How do you build trust? How do you connect with people? And for us, that ties in with something that we call psychological safety, around people knowing that they can trust you to deliver, to be with, and to be present with them. That then ties into the sense of integrity around the values that I hold and what I stand for. Then we've got the idea of your personal style, how you bring that alive for you. We tap a little bit into the Brené Brown work here around openness and honesty. Are you able to step into that space more regularly? And that builds this consistency. Remember earlier we talked about alignment between the inside of us, our values and beliefs, and our external behaviour. Of course, we can't deny your expertise, hugely important in terms of what people know about you. Are you able to do this with confidence? And then all of that leads to you walking an authentic or a more authentic path on a day-to-day basis. So we use this brand pyramid to help people really hone in on who they are as an individual. And this is a fabulous bit of the workshop where people do some work with their buddies and in smaller groups. And what they're starting to do is build this pyramid for themselves. So it starts with your values, the things that are important to you, the things that guide you on a day-to-day basis. We add into that, so what are your standout strengths and your skills and experience? What's the value that you are contributing to the organisation? And then what's the best of what you bring? So that in a way is your essence. And so we've included in here an example of someone who likes to build peak performing teams. And they're adding value by creating environments in which teams thrive. And each individual is developed. They've then listed out what their strengths are and then what are their values. So the values at the core tend to drive everything else that one does. And so we invite everyone in the workshops to work this through for themselves and to come up and share the best of what they bring, and that's their brand statement. And it's a very exciting place to be, to hear those stories. So if I was using this for myself, it might be something like, if the best of what I bring might be, I enable people and women in particular actually to thrive and progress their careers. And I do that by designing and facilitating development opportunities, which I hope then inspire women to want more and to be more for themselves and for their careers. And then my strengths around that are to do with connection, creating safety, positivity, some straight talking, more of a coaching style. And then that reflects my values of compassion and openness and wanting to make a difference, and also constantly developing myself. So personal growth is an important value to me as well. So this is something for you to be thinking about. You know, it's on the worksheet, you know, buddy up, get that buddy and have a chat with them, really dig deep in this bit and help work through what would be your essence. And that's a great way to start building your brand and talking about your brand as you move forward with your career.
All right, thanks, Gail.
Thank you, Colette.
Yes, so as Gail said, that's an opportunity in the workshop to really spend time with their buddy and really do some deep thinking. And we encourage you to maybe take that away as something from today that you might want to frame for yourself in terms of just really honing in on what that brand is that you want to be communicating. And of course, once you know what it is that you want to be known for, it's then how do you communicate that out to the business, and how do you ensure that you're seen as having leadership presence? So if you can nudge me on a slide, please. So we think about leadership presence as really, how do we quickly build credibility, influence and trust? And that was a word that Gail used just earlier, and I've also seen in the chat today as well. So those three elements, and as we think about that, we like to put a neat equation together, and the three elements that we see as shaping the perceptions of leadership presence being what happens in our head, so the thinking, the cognitive processes that go on, our interaction, so how others experience us, and then reveal what others see of us. And that, of course, then shapes the perception of whether we're seen to have a confident leadership presence. So we're going to go through each of these in the equation and just give a little bit more detail. So if we start with thinking then, so as I say, these are the things that happen in our head. These are the mental processes that go on. And when we do this well, we're seen as strategic and intentional. And I guess sort of together, I suppose, is one way of framing it. And it includes being intentional. So a word again that Gail used right at the start of today's session around our brand and being authentic with it, with, you know, being ourselves with intention. So very much about having intent, being deliberate with our goals, being prepared. And so it's about having that strategic vision, being organized with our ideas, and being seen to sort of bring the best of our wisdom and judgment. And then, of course, it's interact. So when people experience us in this way, we're seen to sound like and feel to others like a leader. So it's about making use of our voice and making sure we're using appropriate language. And leaders are not known as ramblers, are they? So leaders have, you know, succinct sound bites and compelling stories that capture the essence of what they want to say in a really interesting and a compelling way that people remember and can draw visualizations from. And it's about being prepared to take a stand. So it's also about being able to be assertive and decisive when needed, so that people can look to you for that leadership, that direction, particularly in times of a crisis, but doing so in a way that is approachable and empathetic. So being able to listen, to understand, being seen as fair and inclusive. And so we know that there are opportunities to shape the way in which we voice our views. And we know certainly from our programme that there are opportunities for women to use their voice more, and for everybody indeed. But in terms of some of the factors here, so volume, pace, tone and energy, we know that most women have the opportunity to speak more loudly so that they are heard, taking up more space with their voice in the room. And I think in one of the tasters earlier, we talked about actually when women are in the minority, particularly in meetings, we are seen to contribute less. So we don't speak up as often, and our opinions and ideas are not often attributed to us when we're in the minority. So making sure that when we have a voice, we're using it to its fullest. Tone, so that's about presence and gravitas, knowing when to inject energy and pace and positivity, to when also to be more calm, still and serious in order to get our point across. So matching our voice and tone to the situation and the points that we want to emphasize. Energy, again, very similar. So this is about being able to convey passion for a topic. And again, when we were talking about headwinds, there were some in there that were talking about being seen to be scary or being seen to be emotional. And that's often a stereotype that women have to grapple with. And so for women, being able to show passion, but without being seen to be too emotional, is often a headwind that women have to balance. And so being able to choose words to convey that passion, rather than maybe through the energy in the way it's delivered, can be a way to adjust to make sure that that passion is perceived as real intent, rather than emotion that is maybe not used effectively. And then pace, of course, that's about speaking faster or slower, using dramatic pauses, creating space in the conversation so that people are poised and waiting for what you might say next. So really playing around with that full use of your voice. And of course, as I say this, some of you might be thinking, gosh, that's really simple, and it's a little bit trite maybe to kind of cover off how we use our voice. But actually, again, if we go back to what we perceive as leadership presence, we know that leaders who do this well really do grab attention, keep it, and are perceived as confident and having that leadership presence. And we know that those TED Talks that keep us engaged use that full spectrum of voice. So we just we put that in there just to get you to think about what else you might do. You know, some of these are only small adjustments, but can have a really, really big impact. Okay, so then the final part of that equation that we were covering was reveal. So this is about what we show of ourselves, and this can sometimes be unconscious. So we have to remember this is what we show consciously and unconsciously. So by unconsciously, I'm talking about sometimes those leaked behaviours that maybe are unintentional and we hadn't meant to show. And so here we talk about what impression we create in what others see of us. So posture and movement. So when we are presenting, we need to think about how we're standing, whether we're making full use of the space, whether we're stood behind a lectern and whether we're maybe seen to be hiding behind that, or whether we're fully embracing that space that it creates for us. Being careful to not pace around too much that it creates a distraction, but not being rooted so much that people are feeling like they're frozen solid, they're not moving. So how do we best create movement and use our posture to create that presence and impact? Of course, facial expressions, making sure that they match what we're thinking. We can all leak unintentional thoughts through our facial expression. So being in control, being mindful, again, of what we're displaying. And of course, appearance, so making sure that we are, fitting of the cultural expectations of us. So being consistent, humble and composed under pressure. Again, so if we move on to thinking about some of these more obvious factors that affect the congruency between what and how we communicate. And so body language and non-verbal, of course, needs attention paying to it. And I've listed a couple already in terms of facial expressions and posture, but a couple of others in here to really think about. So touch, touching your hair too often can be seen as a sign of anxiety or undermining yourself. So being aware of some of those traits that we may have picked up and habits that we may need to just dial up or dial down in order to have the impact that we want to have. And again, going back to something that Gail referenced earlier, it's not about changing who we are, but it's about thinking about which shade of purple we need to be in different circumstances in order to have the desired impact and have the intention we hope to have. So it's about just, not changing who we are and how we come across entirely, but making sure that the Colette and the Gail that we intend to be is the Colette and Gail that people get from us. So really being very mindful of how often we use our hands, how often we touch our face, how often we're using, we're making eye contact. So again, all within cultural references. And it's at this point that we encourage people on our programs to really think about their brand and practice delivering their personal brand with their buddy. And one thing that we make reference to, and we're going to encourage you to do the same, if you haven't come across Amy Cuddy before and her TED Talk, she really draws a very strong link between what we think and how we behave. She draws a strong link between how we can use our body to influence our mind. So the way in which we stand, whether we stand small and small or we stand tall and big, and how that can impact how confident we feel and the impact that we can have on ourselves in terms of tricking our brain into that more confident, leader-like approach. So yes, if you haven't come across that, she talks about the sort of superwoman pose and actually the value of just before presenting, being able to stand tall and proud. Okay, so we're going to move into where we would be in the programme. So this would be around lunchtime that we would have covered everything that we are talking to now. And after lunch, we would then have a guest speaker. So we do invite a guest speaker onto our programme for 45 minutes at this point to share their experiences, and we get huge value from having a different voice and a different perception on these areas for women to talk to. I can see in the chat, so it's Amy Cuddy. Thank you, Carol, you've popped the name, and somebody's also, Lauren, you've popped the link for me. Brilliant. So I've got some helpers gearing us up already, so that's great. Yeah, so that's the link. Thank you, Lauren. So those of you that want to look that up. All right, so after the speaker, we would do a break, another stretch, and get people ready to get back into that focus of learning again. And we would move on to sharing achievements and aspirations. So Gail, you're going to take us through the afternoon.
I am. And I was just going to say, I also saw in the chat, someone I think said, how can you, if you're maybe a little bit quieter within yourself, how do you do that? And so I think it's useful to read, I think it's Susan Cain's book on quiet leadership, which I think is more around how to bring your authentic self if you are more inwardly focused around that. So maybe that's helpful for whoever raised that question. The chat has gone. There's quite a few things happening in the chat, so it's disappeared off my screen now. So for our final sort of 8 minutes or so before we get to a very short Q&A, we are going to be, as Colette says, thinking and looking at this idea of self-advocacy, this idea of speaking up for ourselves. And I don't know what you think about this. So maybe in the chat, you know, you might say, oh, I'm okay with speaking for myself, promoting myself, sharing my successes, asking for opportunities. Or maybe it feels a little bit awkward, perhaps potentially like this individual on the screen here. So maybe pop any thoughts in the chat around that, around whether you're comfortable with that or not. Yeah, and so I can see, oh, it terrifies me is one of the comments. Yeah, and it feels a bit awkward, feel uncomfortable. Yeah, thank you, Susan Cain, you got it right, C-A-I-N, quiet, yeah, feels awkward. So thank you for that. And it's not surprising really that it does feel a little bit awkward, because as women, really as young girls, we are socialized in a way not to brag, not to talk about successes, not to talk about accomplishments. Which then means it's quite challenging sometimes for us to ask for that pay rise or that promotion or that opportunity. And this ties in also to what we find a lot in the women is, if I have a belief around, I'll just do great work, you know, people will notice me, that's enough, I'm just doing great work. But actually in this day and age, that is not enough. You might be lucky. I've had some wonderful mentors and sponsors who have recognised me, seen me, helped me along the way. But actually, it doesn't always happen like that. So sometimes just doing good work will not get you the response or the desire that you're looking for. And sometimes we can also underplay perhaps, or say to ourselves, I don't have time for influencing or the politics or the this or the networking. But actually all of these things are really important when it comes to increasing your visibility in the business. And I hear really regularly, oh, I was just lucky. Yeah, I was in the right place at the right time. I was just lucky that I got that job. Nothing to do with the conscious choices that you've been making over the past months and years to get you into that position. So there is something about thinking to ourselves, look, what could I do to be helpful and more compassionate with me? And we've already explored a little about this to do with reframing. So that idea of how do I change that sort of inner critic to become more of an inner coach? So if I'm feeling like this is bragging, maybe I could be a bit gentler and kinder to myself and just say, oh, this is making my work more visible. Or I'm informing, I'm adding value. And the one at the bottom there, I love this idea of advocating on behalf of others as well. So in the Barack Obama administration, the women in his team, they started to do something called amplification. And I suggest you all help each other with amplification. So if you're in a meeting and you have a colleague, a female colleague who's been talked over, or their ideas been taken by someone else, or they're not able to find their voice, a great way to advocate for them is to speak up. And it's so much easier often for us as women to speak up on behalf of others rather than to speak up on behalf of ourselves. So if we do that for someone, then let's make sure someone is doing that for us as well, which is why it's great to have a sponsor or someone within the business who is helping raise your visibility and raise your brand around the business. So in a way, then we invite people then think about, oh, am I doing things that minimize my contributions? So this sense of over apologizing, saying I'm sorry, being a bit hesitant, maybe not really hearing and being with positive feedback. That happens a lot. Oh, I'm just doing my job. Whereas actually it's a fabulous opportunity to say, oh, so what did you like about what I did? Where did it add value? What was the impact? This is what I thought. And it leads into a deeper, richer conversation. So we're going to launch our second poll. Anastasia, if you could please. And, do you relate to any of these that are up there? It's multiple choice, so you can answer as many as you want. Or, yeah, somebody's put none of these. So if you've put none of these, I think whoever that individual is, pop something in the chat that is a top tip for the others who are maybe on this webinar. So there's a lot going on here around, they're all getting a sort of even flow at the moment. Brushing off positive feedback is in the lead. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Colette, is there anything happening within the chat just as we
There's
move
been
the
some
slides on a
great
little?
comments there's been some lovely comments. So some people saying it doesn't apply, but others saying things like 100% all of this is applicable, having to shift mindset to get out of downplaying those achievements when you get positive feedback. So not brushing it off, not instantly minimizing your contribution and diminishing what you have done. Others saying actually really difficult to sort of find the opportunity to speak up about achievements, maybe if there isn't the context for linking it to something, having to bring that up yourself, bringing it up out of context can feel slightly uncomfortable and awkward. Yes, so lots in there, lots to unpick, but yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's great. So we're not saying it's easy, but it does start with doing something different to get yourself a different result. And so maybe you could start to reflect on the question around who are the people who might benefit from knowing more about your achievements? And then how might you find a way to connect with them and to speak to them? And then we've got this little tool that we use here, which is to do with the self-advocacy piece, which is really around how to structure your achievements and your accomplishments so that you can make your contributions more visible in your organisation. So you might want to think about, well, who needs to know more about this? Who are the decision makers that could be impacting my career? Who are the leaders you'd like to work more with or would like to build a connection with? Are there any projects that you'd like to get involved with? And so this is a great way to be thinking about that. And so what we suggest is that you start to use a little bit more the word I, because as women, we tend to use we a lot. And that comes from that wanting to give credit to the people around us and our team, the collaboration of it. But there needs to be a little balance between the we and the I. So it starts with deciding who's it you'd like to share something with about an accomplishment, an achievement. So this is what I'd like to share. And then you'll notice there's a second I. So this is what I did. And then really important to then include within that the impact. So what was the impact of what you did? And then what we do is we encourage you to go in for the ask more. So what do you want more of as a result of that? How can you start to feed the story of who you are, what you want visibility to, in order to get more opportunities for you as an individual? So as I was saying earlier, you know, if there's an opportunity and someone gives you feedback like, you know, well done, Gail, you know, it would be important now, I think, for me to be saying, okay, tell me a little bit about why it was well done. What did I do? This is what I think I did, and getting into that richer conversation that really helps us discover more about how we're being seen, what our visibility is, and what we're actually amplifying about ourselves. So if you can't do this for yourself, find someone else who can do it for you, and then work together to help each other step more into that advocacy space. So we would finish then the session in the real session with really good buddy conversations around reviewing actions, thinking about next steps, and starting to explore what's resonating most, and coming up with maybe just one thing that you're going to pay attention to and do some work towards. So Colette, may I pass back to you? Thank you.
Gail. Right, so that brings us towards the end of this short taster session. We are going to stay on for just a couple of moments to do a Q&A, but before we do that, Anastasia is going to pop the evaluation in the chat for you to complete. We'd love you to do that now for us to get a sense of how you found today. And let me just remind you what's coming up next. So as we mentioned at the start of the session, we're going to be looking at adding strategic value. And so this is going to be looking at the common barriers to being strategic, adding strategic value, and communicating strategically. So next week, you'll find myself joined by another one of our Elevating Women in Leadership facilitators, Madeline Shearer. Keep up the buddy conversations in the next week, review your actions, make use of that worksheet. I hope we started a number of actions in your mind for you to take away and continue to think about and process over the next week. And that worksheet will hopefully guide you in starting to hone that into some development actions for you to take away from this session. Hopefully it's given you a good flavour for how we run these sessions. If you do have any queries, then we have got that email address. So that's ewill@lhh.com. Gail, I don't know if you've got the slide there that you can pop up. But loving all of the comments in the chat. Thank you, everybody. And if there are any particular questions, I saw one question about what level of leaders are these programs aimed at. So we run 2 levels of leadership, one at the mid-level, one at the senior level. The senior level includes that session next week that I mentioned on adding strategic impact, and also includes a recommendation for optional executive one-to-one coaching alongside all of these modules that we're covering. So hopefully that answers that for you.
And Colette, there's been 1 or 2 queries around where to get previous recordings.
Yes, so if you contact us on that email address, then we will make sure that the recordings do make their way out to you if you haven't managed to make the previous 2 sessions. That's no problem at all. Great, I'm not seeing any questions, lots of positive comments. Thank you for that, that's great. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Lots of great comments.
Gail and Colette, there was one more question about what level of leader the programme is aimed at.
Yes, thanks, Anastasia. So did just cover that off. So for those of you that maybe didn't hear that, so that's mid-level and the senior level. Mid-level would take you up to where we are now, these 3 sessions that we have covered. The senior level has the additional module that we're covering next week on adding strategic value, and has that recommendation for optional one-to-one executive coaching with one of our executive coaches to really deepen the insights and to bring in the contextual challenges at that more senior level to help personalise the journey.
I saw a little question was in the chat around what do you do when your manager takes credit for your work? And so I think my thoughts on that were, I would get curious about why they're doing that or what is behind that. So I would start to ask some questions around that to understand it. And maybe there's something that you are missing within that whole conversation piece. So once I understand more, then I might start to have a conversation with the manager around the impact that that's having on me, and then try to get into a conversation with them. Colette, have you any other thoughts on that?
No, I would agree with you, Gail. I think I would be curious to understand where that's coming from and what that looks like and who that is, but if it's targeted at a particular level, so perhaps it's to their own superiors, and whether that's part of the story for that, and how you can think about how you sort of support each other in sharing successes, and what else your brand manager might be looking to do in terms of their own brand, and how you can maybe support that.
And there was one little question, I think there's just about a minute left. Someone said, what do we do when self-advocacy is being ignored? And so I think for me, I would actually start to think about, how am I communicating? And is there something different I need to do to message what I am talking about differently? Am I choosing the best time, the right person? You know, is it someone else that I need to be sharing this with? Because if it's being rebuffed, it might be something about how I'm messaging it, or choosing the wrong time perhaps to do it. Colette, have you any?
So I would add to that, just making sure that it's linking to what the organisation sees to be valuable. And we talked about this in some of the other taster sessions. So these niche expectations of us, and what the organisation has sort of written and unwritten rules around what gets you ahead and what do they value. And are you self-advocating on those things that the organisation is asking of you around? So, you know, are you able to link it to the organization's strategy and direction and vision to show that actually those things that you're sharing achievements around really show how you're contributing in a way that the business really values? So trying to emphasize those links more clearly. And I think reiterating a point that Gail made, that we also make on the programme several times, which is, if your efforts to self-advocate are being rebuffed, finding yourself a sponsor that also can advocate on behalf of you in the right spaces at the right time. So perhaps they have avenues into those with an ear that are going to be more receptive of that, as another way. So seeking out, or finding somebody that you see do it really well, and seeking some tips from them. Like, you know, I've observed that, you know, people really listen when you advocate for this, or you're getting a lot of time or praise around this particular thing, which is great. Like, how are you managing to get that energy around that? What have you done? Who's supported you? And try and get some input that way.
Great.
All right, I think that probably takes us up to the hour, if not just shortly past. So again, thank you for everybody that's still online, and any sort of additional questions that we haven't managed to get to, if you do want to email us, then we'll be happy to get back to you. Otherwise, we will see you next week for our final taster session. Have a good rest of the day wherever you are, on whatever time zone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much, everybody.